Joe Ducey here with ABC15, and you are here for a town hall, a virtual town hall involving one of the biggest topics a lot of people are facing now and have been facing since March when this pandemic began: evictions and what you can do as a renter, the assistance that you can get possibly now, the new executive order that took place, and what you need to do, additional steps in order to delay the enforcement of the evictions. Although we know the evictions can continue, it's to delay the enforcement. Joining me is Courtney Holmes, an investigative reporter here with ABC15, who's been doing a lot of coverage with the evictions and with DES and all the issues going on with unemployment. We go into some of those issues too, because they kind of intertwine. People who are out of work, can't get employment, have problems paying their rent. Also with me is Brett Rasner with Community Legal Services. Brett, thanks for being here, and we'll go into a little bit about what you guys do in a little bit here. And Cynthia Zwick is with Wildfire. So, Cynthia, I guess first of all, could you just explain a little bit about what your organization does, and then how maybe people can get help from you or through your various resources?
Sure, and thank you. Wildfire is a statewide organization that does a couple of different things. We support community action agencies, which are located in every county and actually distribute a lot of the rental assistance eviction prevention funding. We also are a statewide anti-poverty organization, so we work on systemic level issues, working to create financial stability and economic equity throughout Arizona. In this space that we're operating today, we have partnered with 9 organizations throughout the city of Phoenix to distribute $20 million in eviction prevention funding. And that support and the agencies that were working with us is all available on our website, which is wildfireaz.org. And anyone who has an interest in connecting with one of those organizations can go there and get the email address and or the phone number for outreach.
Okay. Is there anything more you wanted to say about, like, what if people are watching this right now? What kinds of questions might they have that you could be able to help them with?
Sure. So the program that there are a lot of different programs that are operational right now, all of which are also listed on the Department of Housing website. The program that we're administering for the city of Phoenix permits $4,200 total to go to an individual who's eligible. And the only thing that determines eligibility is whether you've had a negative financial impact because of COVID and that you have lawful presence in the state of Arizona. That's it. There's no income eligibility requirement. So it's a fairly simple process. Once that's determined, once you're determined eligible, you will be asked for a copy of your electric bill so we can get your account number, gas bill if you have gas, and your City of Phoenix water bill, and then a copy of your lease or your mortgage statement if that's what you're applying for. There's $300 that will automatically be credited to your City of Phoenix water bill. And there's a total of $600 that will be used for gas and electric. If you only have gas, you can get $600. And then there's $3,300 that will be applied to the rent or your mortgage statement payment. I should mention that the money goes directly to the vendor. It goes directly to the utility or the landlord. It doesn't go, we don't cut a check to the applicant. So if that's the expectation, that won't be happening.
That would be nice. But
yeah, it would be nice.
Yeah. And I guess, Brett, just explain a little bit about what people can ask you about. I think Community Legal Services handles a lot of things, but you may be concentrating on the evictions part of this and the steps that have to be taken. What can people learn from you?
Okay, well, you're right. Community Legal Services does a variety of civil legal issues, practice areas for low-income Arizonans. And one of the areas that we practice in is landlord, tenant, and other housing. And we are very active in these executive orders. We've got a lot of forms. We've got a lot of educational materials. They're available on our website, clsaz.org. There are also materials related to employment and consumer and health and economic stability. So we've actually got a variety of issues today. What I'm here to do is talk about primarily Executive Order 2020-49 and how people qualify for it and what they need to do and what the consequences are at the end of that. So general questions about the executive order allowing people to remain in their homes through October 31st.
Okay. Courtney, you've been covering a lot of this. I don't know what you want to get into first or what you think's most crucial right now.
Well, I think the first thing that we should address is we know at least 17,000 people applied for the state housing assistance that was put in place back in April, and it has been very, very, very slow getting out. You need to know that the money that Cynthia is talking about through City of Phoenix, this is new. So apply for that. If you are not in City of Phoenix, if you are in Mesa, you can apply with Mesa. You can also apply with Maricopa County. I know while you were talking, I was looking at some of the comments, and some of the there was a social worker who was saying this is frustrating because you're only talking about Phoenix. There is help through Maricopa County as well. Even if you have applied through the state, applied through Maricopa County if you are not in City of Phoenix. Maricopa County does have some income requirements, but they have lessened it. So you can make more and still qualify. And Cynthia, I believe City of Phoenix is also they're using it for mortgage assistance as well, right? It's not just rental assistance.
Correct. Rent and mortgage assistance. And that's a great point that you made, Courtney, because there is funding available throughout the state. The housing program is serving every county in the state through the Community Action Agency. So you can still apply for that funding. If you apply in Maricopa County and or in City of Phoenix, you can also receive the Department of Housing money. So they're not exclusive programs. The county program, as you indicated, has a 300% of the federal poverty level as the income guideline. So that's fairly high. And it hopefully will capture some of the folks that have lost their jobs and just need that assistance today. It's my understanding the city of Tucson and Pima County are also looking to put some money out into the community. So it's expanding. It's just taken a while before the money gets released, unfortunately. The good news is the eviction moratorium has been extended, so there is a little bit more time to help us get the money to the families that need that support right now.
Really quick, I want to, because I'm looking at some of the comments and they're like, what about the property owners? What about the property owners? The money for property owners is not as plentiful, and it has been explained to me that they are expected to rework their situations with their lenders. Now, if you are a landlord, the state is going to put in, I'm told, I'm still waiting on this information. But last week, the governor announced that the state is going to kick in like a $5 million program for landlords, which that process still has not been disclosed. Hopefully, the governor will have something to say about that today at his press conference. Okay.
Yeah, we just saw Helen Ferguson had a comment up there that talked about that. Eric Hall's another person who wrote a little while ago, people that do not pay rent set up landlords to lose their property and not able to pay their bills. I cannot afford to keep a person living in my unit if they are not paying. This is how I make money to pay my bills. Mm-hmm. We're hearing from more mom and pop type landlords, not these big property complex owners that many people think have deep pockets and can take this. So you mentioned, was it $5 million, I guess, that the state has now said that they're going to give to offset some of these losses. I know that the CARES Act provided some protection for federally backed mortgages in terms of paying that back. Anything else that landlords can gain from this? I know that both Brett and Cynthia, I'm sure you're not, they are also victims in this in some way. Anything more that they can do in this process?
I think there's a couple things that they can do. And I know that there are some membership organizations that are supporting their work and their efforts. I think there is some flexibility within a city or a county to address that issue and allocate some funding through the CARES Act. The other thing that we're partnering with is some of the landlord organizations and smaller landlords at the federal level, because we're hopeful that when the next relief package is completed and the money gets distributed to the states, that money really does flow through the cities and the counties, and that is a part of it, that there is landlord support. We totally appreciate the fact that the landlords are struggling as well. But we also were concerned that if there wasn't some kind of an extension in place, we couldn't get this $20 million into their hands in a timely way. We think by the tenants being able to pay their rent, that is also helpful to the landlord ultimately. So I agree, though, that there needs to be more support provided to the landlord community, and we're happy to help with that and are working, as I said, at the federal level to see if there's some additional support that can come through.
Okay. Any more on that, Courtney? I was going to move on to this, the new order, eviction order.
Yeah, I think we kind of need to get to the order because it's going to take a little time for people to even get the money to get to the landlord. So they kind of got to know how the law works for, or rather the executive order works for them. And I think it's important for people to know that evictions, it is just a court hearing. Like, that's what it is. So you can still be evicted, but there are protections to keep you from being removed. So let's go ahead and get into that. Brett, if you want to get into what the executive order continues to do.
Sure, and you are correct.
That up for us.
Yeah, so you're correct. The landlord. So let's just take somebody who's working in a service industry. The restaurant shuts down. They're not getting a paycheck. They're not paying their rent. The landlord can still give them a 5-day notice. The landlord can still file the action. The court can still issue a judgment against them. What this executive order, it's Executive Order 2020-49, what it does is it's an order from the governor to law enforcement and constables not to enforce writs of restitution, which will issue generally 5 days, 6 days. It's after the expiration of 5 days after a judgment in an eviction action. And so it's not an absolute ban on evictions. A person who does some criminal act, or that justice so requires that they be removed from the property, the constables will still remove people. But this executive order is designed to keep people in housing, especially for folks that are quarantined because of their own diagnosis, or they're at risk, or somebody else in their household has been quarantined. Or they're staying home because they've got a school-age child that they have to take care of, or for financial reasons, significant loss of income, a loss of employment completely. There is sort of a catch-all other circumstances, but we find most people are falling into the at risk, at greater than average risk, and those go by CDC guidelines. So people can go to the CDC. Nice dog. People can go to the CDC and see what factors can make them at increased risk. And if they're at increased risk or have this, a financial impact is probably the number one thing we're seeing. They provide notice to their landlord with any available documentation. You want to keep copies of that information because you may have to show it to the judge or the constable at a later date. You want to be able to prove that you actually gave it to the landlord and they received it. And it should be fairly specific. It should tell them, where you live, who you are, that you've been impacted by the coronavirus in some regard. We have forms, and they closely match the executive order, so you can check the box for, what is affecting you in particular. And at that point, you are presumptively under the protections of this act. This executive order. And if the landlord wants to have you removed, they have to go back to court and file a motion to compel the enforcement of the writ. And that's kind of a follow-on process where there will be another hearing. You will get notice from the landlord. The courts may call you. So you definitely, if you're involved in this eviction process, you need to be certain that the court has your correct address and your correct phone number so that they can get a hold of you and make sure that you get notice of this hearing.
There have been, we'll get back into the hearings because I know Courtney's covered a lot of that too. There have been, I think what I want to get into is this new executive order. You were talking about the proof that had to be given to the constables or to the landlord, and there was a problem with that in the beginning. A lot of people, it was very gray. It wasn't really spelled out, and I don't even know if it actually was ever spelled what you need to give the landlord or the constable to prove that you have a COVID-19 financial or health situation. But it was set to expire, the enforcement delay, on July 22nd. That's been extended to October 31st if certain requirements are met. So really only till August 22nd, another month, unless these additional requirements are met. Brett, could you go into what those are? Not only do you have to now prove that you have this, struggle because of COVID-19, there are two other things you have to do.
You are correct. After August 21st, you also need to be able to show that you have applied for rental assistance, and that can be through any agency or nonprofit. You, at a bare minimum, take a screenshot. You need to show that it's a completed pending application. The second thing you need to do is you need to work out a payment plan, or at least offer a payment plan. If the landlord won't do the payment plan, you just need to be able to show that you attempted to enter into a payment plan with your landlord. Those two requirements do kick in after August 21st. Anybody that gives a notice previous to that date should probably give another notice on or right about August 21st, detailing their ongoing COVID-related problem, plus the payment plan and the proof that they've applied for rental assistance.
Can you see some issues happening with this proof, as we did with initial proof that had to be provided for the COVID-19 struggles? Can you see, is there something that's going to have to come back to show that the person actually did file for assistance with a nonprofit or with the city or whatever, to prove that they actually did that? I don't know if some landlords might, hold them accountable to say that doesn't prove that you actually did this. And then some issues also with the working out a payment arrangement.
Right. So as far as the rental assistance goes, it's my understanding that the organization, they understand what the requirements are as well, and they're reading the executive order, and I believe they are all going to provide some sort of receipt or printout or confirmation, a written confirmation, it would be sufficient to cover that requirement. Something that they can hand, a tenant can hand their landlord, showing that they've gone through that process. And at a bare minimum, when they're finished, take a screenshot, do something to show. But our belief is that these organizations, they understand the requirement, and they will provide the adequate notice or some kind of a receipt or communication that can be passed on to the landlord, showing that process has been done. As far as the payment plan, we have a form on our website that it identifies the landlord, the tenant, some conditions related to the lease, when it started, when it expires, and then it has areas where the landlord can opt to, split the money up, defer the money, even waive fees, waive parts of rent. Not all landlords are going to agree to do this, but the executive order requires that the tenant try to work out a payment plan with the landlord.
Okay, and that payment plan doesn't necessarily have to be accepted by the landlord, but an attempt to work out a plan is what, in other words, we're trying to work out a dialogue, I guess, between the landlord and the tenant, correct?
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but our understanding from reading the executive order and talking amongst other housing experts is that offering the payment plan, whether it's accepted or not, should be sufficient for the executive order after August 21st.
Okay, Cynthia, do you have anything to say about both of those, about the proof that people did apply for rental assistance and how that's going to work out?
Yeah, what I know is that the agencies that are providing the support, that are taking applications, do have a process. Sometimes it's automated, sometimes it's it's more manually generated, but they are all making that available. And I think it just has to show, it doesn't necessarily have to show that you've been approved or that you've received the assistance, but merely that you've applied, which I think is important to note. I think the other thing that what we're finding is there's, along with having difficulty paying your rent, I mean, the COVID crisis, I think, has created a crisis in so many ways for so many members of our community. And I don't think renters are alone, certainly. But I think that those who are often struggling to pay their rent also are going to be having some trouble with their utilities. And the utilities in Arizona have suspended disconnections of those services right now, the electrics in particular, but gas as well. And I think it's also important to seek assistance for those payments as well, especially now, and not wait until the end of the moratorium, which is scheduled to go through the middle of October. We're concerned that folks don't have these huge balances at the end of that time that's going to contribute just as much to the problem at the end of the day. You know, that on top of an inability to make your rent payments. So we know a lot of folks that have lost their jobs or there's hours of cutback are now eligible for some of those services, and we would encourage you to apply for that. And again, if you go to our website, there is a listing of all the organizations in the state that do provide assistance with your utility bills, both gas and electric.
You know, I know Courtney probably has some things to say here, but I just got my electric bill from APS, and I've never had as high a bill as I had. I was shocked because we're home. I mean, we have 3 people working at home, and we try to keep it down. I mean, I think we have it in the 80s, you know, most of the time, trying to keep the bill down. I think a lot of people are probably facing the same thing. And I mean, we'll do a different town hall on this about what the utilities did not do, what the Corporation Commission did not get them to do, which was basically kind of come up with a lower rate for this time during this pandemic.
Right.
But yeah, I think a lot of people are probably facing this. So that's great information to try to get that money that the utilities say they did set aside to try to help people.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Joe, quickly, I know this isn't focused solely on utilities, but all the utility programs, I encourage folks to reach out the way we're asking folks to reach out to their landlord, reach out to the utility now. Let them know if you're having trouble with your bill. There are opportunities for payment plans with them. They have discount rates that they can enroll you in, and they have, as I said, we have some bill assistance opportunities. So please reach out sooner rather than later, and they are more than happy to work with you through the process so that it doesn't just continue to expand and develop debt.
Courtney, what do you think? Anything else you want to talk about? Because I can move
Well,
on. I can see your thoughts.
I'm just looking at the questions here, and a lot of them are saying, where can I apply? Where can I apply? Where can I apply? And I want to reiterate that Cynthia is talking specifically about City of Phoenix, but City of Phoenix is not the only program available. Mesa and Phoenix do their own programs. If you live in Mesa, you need to apply with the City of Mesa. If you live in Phoenix, City of Phoenix is going to take care of you. You can do that through Wildfire. You can go to their website, which is wildfireaz.org. I have that right, Cynthia?
Yes.
Yes, it's up on the screen.
Thank you.
And that is specifically for City of Phoenix. If you live in Mesa, you need to apply with City of Mesa. I don't have that website, but please Google it. If you live anywhere else in the county, Maricopa County is your go-to. They have $30 million that they are passing out to people. There is an income requirement. It is higher than it usually is, but if you do not live in Phoenix or Mesa, Maricopa County Human Services is where you want to apply. So I wanted to get that out there. Another question that I saw, one was from, let's see, Dawn Gray, and she asked about if you are immunosuppressed or you have the potential, a great potential to have very adverse effects if you were to catch COVID-19. Does this order, this executive order, and I suppose this question is for Brett, does this protect you as well? So maybe you weren't laid off from COVID-19 because of COVID-19 or something like that, but let's say you have MS or you have diabetes or you have some issue, health issue that would prevent you from going to work because you're afraid of getting very ill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've actually got a copy of the order here in front of me. And one of the factors says the individual demonstrates that they have a health condition as defined by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that makes them more at risk for COVID-19 than the average person. And we're up here in Yavapai County, and that's one of the things we're seeing a lot is folks over 65, folks with a lot of breathing ailments and other fairly severe health issues, and they will show up, their conditions will show up on those lists on the CDC website, and it's pretty easy to find. And if you do fall into one of those, greater than average health risk categories, then yes, you are covered under the executive order. It may take a little bit of documentation, but, and that's actually something, Joe, you had alluded to earlier, is there was some question about, maybe it was the drafting, maybe it was the interpretation of what documentation was required. The actual language of the executive order, it says available. It says you have to give notice to the landlord with any available documentation. Because sometimes this comes up quickly. Somebody, they're not going to be able to get into their doctor in a matter of 2 days and get all the documentation they need. So they're still going to be covered under the order. At a later date, they should work on getting that documentation, but there's no requirement in the executive order that you have a large pile of medical records or financial records right then and there. You can give the notice and work on the documents later. You just have to give what you have available initially.
Okay. Yeah, for just joining us, I know people are on and off all the time here. This is a ABC15 Town Hall dealing with the same thing we've been dealing with for about 5-6 months now. Evictions and the issues involving that, and renters getting help with trying to pay their bills and staying in their places. Courtney Holmes is here, investigator report with ABC15. Brett Rasner with Community Legal Services, and Cynthia Zwick with wildfire.org, and we're trying to answer your question about assistance and how you can stay in your place. And I saw a couple of questions here that were interesting to me that we're hearing a lot of. I do something also called Let Joe Know. We've got a lot of people writing us with questions involving their rent and the problems they're having. In many cases, there was one from Sylvia, and I don't know, Corlin, if you pulled that or not, but she basically is asking, can they increase my rent? And the other questions, obviously, yeah, there are the landlords allowed to raise the rent during this time with COVID-19? It's just not right. Well, I agree with the last part of that, Sylvia. I don't think it's right, but in terms of legalities, maybe, I don't know if either of you have the answer to that. I would think that they can raise the rent as long as your contract is ended and if there's a new contract that is beginning. Is that the case?
Yeah, I agree. There's nothing in any of the executive orders or in the Landlord Tenant Act that takes into account any kind of ceiling on rent or any kind of restriction on raising rent. It's just a purely contractual matter. If the lease is up and proper notice is given ahead of time, it's business as usual.
Okay. And the other question we're getting a lot of is, my lease was up in June or July, and they are not allowing me to re-sign or to sign a new lease. Now, so it's in the middle of this, but their contract is up and they allow them to stay during that time. But now they want to re-sign it, they can't. Is that just business as usual, or is there anything that protects the renter in that case?
Well, yeah, again, it's same situation. As long as all the proper notices are given and it's not for a discriminatory or retaliatory reason, the landlord can go ahead and terminate the lease. Where the executive order comes in is if, let's say the person's lease expires on June 30th, they didn't have any place to go, so they are now on July 1st, they're a holdover. They're a person in the unit without a contract to be there. That's called a holdover, and that is a reason to be evicted in Arizona. However, if they have the same requirements, if they meet the requirements of the executive order, a person who is holding over can also stay in the unit. It's not just non-payment of rent. It's almost any reason that somebody can get evicted from a residential unit will fall under the executive order, and then it's the landlord's duty to show that there's some reason that they shouldn't be allowed to stay.
Yeah, and I want to touch on a couple of things. I'm seeing some questions are in here, or comments saying my landlord raised my rent in the middle of my lease. That is illegal. It is a binding contract. Your landlord cannot raise your rent in the middle of your lease. And if you get evicted, or if you have to go to eviction court because of that, you should be able to show the judge that this is your lease that you signed and this person decided to raise it. That should be easily handled. The other thing that I want to touch on is, and it's something that Brett brought up earlier that I think we should reiterate, because eviction processes, particularly right now during COVID, are very confusing for renters. Landlords, by and large, have a pretty good idea of how eviction processes are supposed to go, particularly when it has to do with court. But it's renters who don't do this as their business who get confused. And I just want to touch on the process. So if you get served an eviction notice, if your landlord gives you a 5-day notice and says, hey, I want you out of here in 5 days, and you get a court date. When you go to court, if you have not paid, the judge is going to grant that eviction. The eviction is going to be granted, but you don't necessarily have to leave. That's the key here, because that's that writ of restitution that Brett was talking about earlier. You've got to understand the processes. The writ of restitution has to be filed by your landlord if you don't leave. And when that happens, the constable shows up to serve it to you. When the constable shows up, you then say, hey, I have a COVID-19 hardship. Here's my documentation. And according to the courts, what I've been told is the constable will have you and your landlord try and work it out. And if it doesn't happen and the landlord goes back to court, like the landlord has to keep going to court to get you out. The landlord goes back to court to file a motion to compel. So that's going to be the third time the landlord goes to court. And you need to show up to this. That's when you get to show the judge, listen, I have a real hardship here because of COVID-19. I should be protected under this executive order. Here's my documentation. And if that judge understands the executive order and your documentation is in order, you should be able to stay through October 31st, assuming you do these additional things, the letting the landlord know what the situation is in writing, the trying to work out a payment plan, and for sure, this new thing, making sure you apply for rental assistance. Even if you haven't heard from, even if you don't think you're going to get it, apply for it anyway, because it's the application that gets you the protection, not necessarily the disbursement of the money. It's the application, and you need to do everything in writing. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, I think there was a misunderstanding, and maybe still is, from renters, that they are just protected generally. And I think from when I was covering some of the eviction stories, a lot of the reasons that they went through were because the tenant did not show up. And it's pretty easy to show up now because most of these, I think, Courtney, are being done virtually, right? I think they're being done virtually. They're not necessarily, you don't have to show up in the courthouse. You can do this as a renter, as a tenant, on your computer. Is that correct? You know, Courtney?
They tell you if it's telephonic, right, Brett?
I think it is. Yeah. In most cases.
Yeah. Well, at a bare minimum, court should be pretty freely granting motions to appear telephonically. They're trying to keep people out of the courthouse if at all possible.
Yeah. So that's the key, just keeping up with it and showing up. And as you said, it's a process. So that you have to keep showing up. Now, that eviction could still take place, but it's different than the enforcement of the eviction. And I think that's one of the problems coming up are people who are going to have these evictions eventually on their record, finding another place to live. So I think Tiffany had a question that came up here that I think a lot of people are asking themselves. And basically, she's saying, well, once this is over, whether it's July 22nd or August 22nd or October 31st, kick us out. And that's basically the case, correct? I mean, the constables could come. I don't think there's been a process put in place. That was another concern about, are the tenants warned in advance how the constables will do this? Can they come the next day? But yeah, the eviction stays in order. However, they can go through the process, kick you out the second it expires. So I mean, that is the case, correct? And the other concern I think at that time for tenants is, and Cynthia can maybe talk about this too, because she talks about the resources for, monetary help. The 6 months of rent or 8 months of rent they're going to be due at that time if they hadn't paid before. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real concern. And I think that's one of the reasons that we had requested the extension that was put in place. We had actually requested a bit longer. But I think part of the goal, at least part of our goal, was that during the course of this extension, not only would the assistance be available and be provided, but in addition to that, hopefully the economy and the jobs are going to start to recover. So we're getting into a better state economically, globally. I don't know if that's going to happen. I mean, I think we're all hoping that that happens sooner rather than later. Things aren't looking so great here with the virus itself. So this could be sort of a sustained issue and sustained concern, at which point I think we really have to look to our elected officials to put up some more support, to find the way to get additional support to the community. And it's going to have to be a global sort of addressing the situation, because what we know is, and it's been clear in this conversation, renters, we don't want renters to be evicted. There aren't enough affordable homes in the state right now. Folks that get evicted if they can't find another apartment, if they don't have another place to go, become homeless. And nobody wants to see that happen. We don't want to see that population increase. At the same time, we don't want to see the business owners struggle. And so the reality is, sort of collectively, we need to be figuring out what are we going to do if this crisis continues to provide support both for the tenants who are in danger of becoming homeless and the landlords who are struggling financially as well. I mean, it's a dire situation all the way around, and we need to be thinking creatively and pretty globally about how to begin to address that issue with the time we have.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. It's hard to remember sometimes, even for me, what kind of stories I was covering before COVID. It's been,
Right.
100%. And right before this, we were covering stories about the high rents and how people of certain incomes couldn't afford to live here. So
Right.
that is still the case. And people who are kicked out of their place are going to have to find places, and they're not going to be able to afford them. So I could just
Right.
see just a real dire situation, as you said.
Well, Joe,
Go ahead.
I think there's maybe two issues related to the end of the executive order. One is the courts are aware that there's going to be probably a rush of new filings, and there's going to be a whole lot of stayed writs of restitution. The Supreme Court of Arizona has been issuing administrative orders on how courts are to deal with this situation. So the courts, they're not operating in a vacuum. They know that this is going to happen. They're actually taking steps and issuing guidance to the inferior courts, mostly the justice courts where the vast majority of evictions happen. And there was an administrative order that I believe came out this morning. I haven't had a chance to look at it. I believe it supersedes a prior administrative order that came out before the governor's extension of the moratorium. But I think there will have to be hearings on all of these, basically the motions to compel. I believe there has to be a hearing on each of them. That may have changed, or it could still change, but I believe that's the case. Landlords can go back and apply to have the judgments amended, which essentially quashes the writ, and they'd have to apply for a new writ. But we discussed earlier that tenants are responsible for the rent throughout the time they're staying there. Just because you're under the executive order, if you've got that roof over your head, you are responsible for the rent accruing. So some landlords will go back and have those judgments amended. The last thing I wanted to say, though, is the writ of restitution is not automatic. The landlord has to apply for it. If a tenant can get say their employment comes back, and say they get the rental assistance, and they can potentially catch up or come up with a plan to catch up. For the landlords, we do tenant side only, but we're conscious of what the landlords go through as well. For a lot of them, it's just the money. If the landlord and the tenant can work out a deal, the landlord can vacate the judgment. They don't have to get the writ of restitution and remove the tenant. So the parties, this is sort of an unprecedented situation. if the landlords and tenants can get together and take advantage of these rental assistance funds to catch the tenant up, these judgments can go away voluntarily.
Yeah, it's Courtney, did you want to say something about? I saw something you wanted to talk about here, maybe.
Yeah, I just wanted to address Kathleen Lupo, who is asking that we please have real people who are actually living the crisis rather than experts who talk more than listen. Tired of hearing from those who don't walk the walk. Let's get real. I wanted to just reiterate that we do these stories every single day. We talk to real people with this problem. I've spoken to families who are now homeless. I've spoken to people who are about to be homeless. I've spoken to many, many, many people who are living this. And I also know what they're doing that they could, what they're not doing that they could be doing. And I'm trying to address that. That's what we're trying to do, address that with these two folks who know the executive order, who know what's available. And that's what we're trying to bring to you. So because we see the mistakes that are being made on the front end, or rather on the back end, when things could have been done differently on the front end and people just didn't have the information. Right. So hopefully, Kathleen, you will be able to share this with some folks you know who might be able to benefit from what it is that we're talking about today.
Yeah, I mean, the stories are endless. And I think if you watch ABC15 any night at, well, any of the newscasts, but especially at 6, Courtney's been doing a lot of stories on it. I've done them too, about people with just dire situations who didn't know there were certain protections in place or certain resources available, and had to do what they had to do. You know, we've covered a lot of other stories involving DES and unemployment. We won't go. My dogs are getting a little active here. But that's another thing that falls into this, and I think a lot of the people who are commenting here probably have situations with that too, not being able to get the unemployment pay. We've been doing stories about DES, trying to get answers from them, reluctantly, getting some responses, and in some cases none. And then people being sent money who don't deserve it, that's happening too. But anyway, I wanted to go over a little bit about, and then I'll close the doors to the dog. Brett, can you talk a little bit about, as we close down here, if you could talk a little bit about community legal services. I know on your website there, Courtney or Cortland, we could put that up. We have some forms there that'll actually go over, and I was looking at one here and it's great. It talks about to be completed by the landlord, steps taken in agreement with the tenant. So go into kind of a little bit about what you could do for people, or what you would advise people to do who are facing a tough time right now as a renter.
Well, communication is key, and don't wait. As soon as you have an issue, either financial or medical related to COVID-19, don't wait and see what happens. Be proactive, get a form, whether it's a form from our website or someplace else. Let the landlord know immediately. Start working on getting your documentation, because if you've got a non-obvious condition that makes you more susceptible than the average person per the CDC guidelines, you might have to show some sort of paperwork. It may not be available right now, but if you get to that motion to compel hearing at a later date, you got to have that. So probably the number one thing I would say is don't wait. As soon as you get into any situation where you think you might be covered under the governor's executive order, start taking action right away. Be thorough.
Okay, that's great, Brett. Thank you. And how about Cynthia? What would you say here? That maybe something we've left out, or advice you give people?
No, I would say the same. Reach out now. Take whatever action you can. I think Courtney really summed up the importance of that you just take advantage of all of the opportunities that are out there right now. Don't wait. Don't stop talking to your landlord. We've heard about families that are just not responding in any way to outreach from the landlord. That's just going to put you in a worse situation. So we would just echo that. Just reach out, ask for the help that you need, whether it's rental assistance or utility assistance, but do it now. Start working with the folks that have the ability to do something with you. I think I think most people really want to be able to be supportive at this time, and again, just encourage everybody to act before it gets too far down the road, and not be discouraged by. Well, I know it's hard not to be discouraged, but to really take some assertive action and reach out to the folks that can make a difference out there.
Great. Cynthia Zwick, thank you for your time. It was great.
Thank you.
And let's put up Cynthia's website again. It's wildfire.az.org, and that a lot of resources there for people in terms of, well, all kinds of things, but also where you can go to get financial assistance for your situation. Brett Rasner's with Community Legal Services. They deal with a lot of people. You may qualify for their help depending on your income for attorney help with rentals and a lot of other things. And they also have forms for you as a renter to fill out for these new requirements that the governor wants in order for you to keep staying in your place for another couple of months without the evictions being enforced. Courtney, thanks. ABC15 every night at 5, 6, and 10 o'clock. And if you have a question for us, well, abc15.com/town hall if you want to see more of this again and get some of the resources again. You can also talk to us about your problems at rebound at abc15.com. So thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.